let's start with this. I'm going to be looking at what I've called the Manchester housing clearances. Now, I haven't called them the Manchester slum clearances because I think slum is a very loaded word, and I'll come back onto that. And in some ways, I feel that the housing clearances that took place were more incomparable than that with the Highland clearances than with just building new houses, which sounds like a good thing in itself. So what I'm going to start off with is a very short clip from a film that was made in 1947 for Manchester City Corporation as was, which is called A City Speaks. It was done by a quite famous documentarist, Paul Rother, and it lasts for over an hour, and it's available for free if anybody wants to watch it. You just need to Google A City Speaks, and the BFI have got it available for free if anybody wants to watch the whole thing, which is a very interesting program in itself, I think. But all I'm showing you is the first minute or so of it, which is of an aircraft flying across into the centre of Manchester. And I'll talk about it later. So I'm going to share screen, and let's hope this all goes to plan. The reason I gave that was because it just gave a very strange image of Manchester coming in. It was slightly eerie, I felt, and but it was very much showed the crowding of the houses in towards the centre, and the fact that some of them had already been cleared on the north side of Hulme. I don't know whether anybody recognised any of the places in it. It's quite hard. I thought there was Princess Road at one stage, but I wasn't too sure. As I say, that film went on to discuss Manchester's housing policies, and what this talk will be about those policies, but also about individuals' views on what happened and whether these policies were good ones or not. And I think it's important as part of this to say that it's easy to be maybe a bit sentimental about the past and think that everything that they did was wrong and it was a terrible thing to have destroyed communities, which actually in some ways I do think is true. But it was done from, by and large, very good intentions, and but with consequences which I think last for people's lives. And that's what I want to show by doing 2 case studies about how people have reacted to it. Anyway, so this is the housing clearances. Well, slum housing. It's actually derived, apparently, from a Cockney street language or slang. But I don't know how they came up with slum, but anyway, that's where it came up. It was then taken over in the 19th century by reformers in the Victorian period, and it became a description of the densely populated, poorly serviced neighbourhoods that house workers and the reserve army of the unemployed. But the thing as well is about slum housing is that I think slums are generally seen, well, you always tend to think of them as slums are where other people live, not yourself. Very few use it to describe their own neighborhood. But the term slum became gradually a way of describing, denigrating and damning poor districts as centres of criminality and abject poverty that needed to be cleared away in total. And this, I think, is one of the problems. So I'm going to be looking first at Hulme, and I'll be mainly looking at Hulme because I'm particularly interested in what happened there. Now, this is a second short clip I'm going to put on. It lasts 4 minutes, and it's by a friend of mine who's in the Royal Exchange Elders like me, Brenda Hickey, who, well, she'll explain her.
When I remember my Hulme, my heart wants to sing. Shaped the person I am, gave me so many things. I'll just close my eyes and transport myself back. I never moved really. I could never do that. Children out playing till the street lights came on, joking and laughing until the laughter was done. Those streets were our playground, didn't need out else. We were rich in our friendships. It was never about self. Then diggers came. Why? They tore you down, destroyed in one fell swoop. What they didn't destroy, they couldn't remove. My heart, my soul, my roots. When I lived in Hulme, I lived in a bubble, like most of our community. Anywhere outside of Hulme didn't exist. The farthest I ever ventured outside this bubble was to Manchester town centre with my gran on a Saturday afternoon, to Thornton's sweet shop in Piccadilly for their famous special creamy toffee served in a small white greaseproof paper bag, and then through to Piccadilly Gardens to Lewis's to ride on the moving escalator. Such a treat. Then, in my teens, I met and married a soldier. We were posted to Germany. I cried for a month. It was on another planet, another language. I wanted to come home to Hulme. After being in Germany for about 6 months, my mother wrote to tell me that she and the rest of the family had moved to Chorlton. She had to let me know because we'd be staying with her when we came home on leave. She wrote her new address, but no explanation. This doesn't surprise me, as she was never one for saying anything she felt you didn't need to know. When we arrived at the new address, all I wanted to do was get on the 81 bus to take me into Hulme to see my best mate Jackie and the rest of Hulme. I was so homesick. Not used to standing on ceremony in our house, I threw my suitcase into the lobby and shouted over my shoulder to anyone who may have been interested, "See you later, won't be long." I jumped onto the 81 bus and asked the driver for a ticket to the corner of Jackson Street and Stretford Road. "Are you sure?" he said. "Yes," I replied. "Oh, if you're sure." When I reached the stop, there were no words. Gone. Everything. Gone. Everybody gone. I must have stood rooted to that spot for over an hour, because physically I could not move. I felt like a ghost, lost, unable to move, but wanting to stay. Somehow I managed to get back to my mother's address in order to find an explanation for this nightmare. She just shrugged her shoulders. This woman, a few words that hadn't changed. It took me over 50 years to find my best mate Jackie on Facebook. For many years after, in my mind, I was still there, stood on that corner, numb. Before we went back to Germany, I did go back to that corner and got off at that same stop to witness all that demolition. As I stood there, that second time, I closed my eyes and tried to imagine it all still there. When I began to feel an energy, as though it was rising up from the ground. I breathed in this air, this energy. I could feel the soul of Hulme was still there. It still is to this day, because the people are back. Not long ago, I joined with a group of like-minded people in a torchlit midnight walk around what is now known as the Red Bricks, but for us oldies of Hulme, we knew them as Jackson Street Flats. During this walk, I met a lovely lady who I shared my story with, and how I still felt as though I had nowhere I could call home after all these years. This lady looked into my eyes, smiling, put a hand on my shoulder, and said to me the 3 most beautiful words I'd ever heard, and that finally gave me peace. She said, "Welcome home, Brenda."
To get on to now is the second case study from Doreen, a friend of mine, who is in fact a volunteer with Chorlton Good Neighbours with the Tuesday sort of children's group, nursery group. And this is a photo of her with City School Road School in the background. Her auntie Flo lived on the same street, which was Hardman, later Hardwick Street. And then this is another photo of her looking the other way down the street. And at the other end of the street, you can see in the background, St. Wilfrid's School. And of course, no cars around. Nobody had cars at the time. And that's Doreen with her older sister, Ada. This is another photo of the two of them. I thought it was very interesting that what it shows is Doreen with a very posh looking coat on. It was in fact made by her uncle, who was a tailor, but he bet too much and he used to borrow money from her mum. And in return, he made her the coat with what is an Astrakhan collar, which is something quite rare. So even in those, there was, if you like, an informal economy going on there of loans and people doing things that they're good at, in this case, making that. And to show some of the variety of cultural activities going on there, this is the local dance troupe, with Doreen is the one on the right, and they put on shows. It was very popular. Lots of the local girls, obviously, mainly girls, I think, went to it. And of course, there was City Road and Stretford Road in Hulme, which were wonderful shopping areas, a bit like Alexandra Road is which is known by many, I think, of people who live in Chorlton and Whalley Range now. And here you can see the Crown Inn, Baby Fair, and Klein's Wine Bar, and Hesketh's Men's Outfitters. There were really a range of shops there. It was very much a self-contained community. This is on the edge of Hulme, really, getting to near where the what is now All Saints. As you can see here, this is the Cavendish Street, looking towards the church that was pulled down later. There was also a famous store near there as well, which people might remember. Anybody remember the name?
Pauldings.
Yeah, Pauldings. It was a very big department store, and eventually there was a fire there which burnt it down. The other interesting thing to note is the list of places to go. The suburban cinemas. Again, some of you might remember the evening news. Well, you remember the evening news, obviously, but it used to have 2 pages, this page 2 and 3, full of adverts for cinemas. You know, there were, as it shows here, by area, like the Hulme ones there, and also by Chorlton. The Chorlton ones at the time had the White Witch Doctor, I don't know what that was about, and the Saint Returns and the Prince of Pirates at the 2 cinemas it had. The other thing to be aware of was the Hulme Hippodrome, and that was a magnificent place. Again, when I've shown this to people, there's some people who, has anybody here actually went to the Hulme Hippodrome when it was working?
Yes. I saw Hilda Baker there.
Hilda Baker?
Yeah.
I went to the pantomimes there.
Pantomimes, yeah. There was somebody said she'd been to it where they had Bo Peep and her sheep on for some reason. Maybe it was part of a pantomime, and they had real sheep on the stage. But at the end of the performance, everybody in the audience, you could see them scratching because of all the fleas on the sheep that had gone around the audience. So it became a variety of things, but it is still there, and there is a campaign to save Hulme. And in 2021, there was a gathering to mark its 120th birthday, with films celebrating its history projected on its exterior as part of the event. And they're trying to get a campaign first of all, to stop it being pulled down, and secondly, to it being renovated. And I think it's really sad that nothing has actually happened to that. It's just, it is still there. Now, this is something as part of the history of Hulme, which is Royce's first former workshop in 1930s in Cook Street. And of course, there was the famous meeting of, so this was in May 1904, when they first met, I think at the Midland Hotel. And within minutes of seeing Royce's twin-cylindered 10-horsepower car that he'd made, and I think from, if I've got it accurately, this is one of the first cars that Royce made, which is remarkably detailed and full of craftsmanship. After taking the motor car for a drive, Rolls agreed on the spot to sell as many cars as Royce could build under the names Rolls-Royce, which you might be familiar with. Then, of course, we got to the actual demolition of Hulme, and you can see it there with the lines of the various streets superimposed on it. And this is where I think, I don't know whether Barry has arrived, whether you're here, Barry. Could you unmute just to say who you are?
Yeah, yes, I'm here.
Yeah, because Barry was involved in the campaigns following the demolition of Moss Side, if I'm correct, Barry, to try and stop it happening elsewhere. Is that right?
I wasn't involved. I went to meet them when the council decided they wanted to pull down part of Longside.
And then eventually that was appealed against, and they succeeded in stopping it happening. Is that correct? That's
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we went to see the people in part of Moss Side because it was more than one phase there.
Yeah.
And they were campaigning in a sort of more outward or southern part of Moss Side after the more northern part had been demolished. They were campaigning for what was called phased redevelopment. They weren't campaigning completely against slum clearance. They wanted the streets pulled down one at a time and rebuilt and move people street by street into the new houses in order to maintain the community, to preserve the community.
I think there was also the idea that you could repair and refurbish some of the housing as well. It wasn't all in an equally derelict state. It wasn't all in such a bad state. But definitely the idea, I looked through some of the old council minutes and discussions about this, and the general view was that they needed to pull the lot down because it was cheaper to do it that way. It's much easier to just get a demolition company in who demolishes the whole lot, and then you rebuild it, rather than having to do repair and infill, which would have kept more of the old spirit alive. It's my personal view that if you demolish a whole area, it loses something very, very deeply embedded that you can't easily replace. The example I give of that, which is my own personal view, which is Salford Quays. I've never liked it because it's got almost nothing of the old Salford about it. Even the docks, the only thing from the docks that hasn't disappeared is the water. Anyway, end of my particular rant on that one.
Bernard,
yeah.
Can I have a word?
Frank, certainly, Frank. Yeah, hi, Frank.
Well, I was working in the city during the declaration of the clearance areas, and in fact, the houses were mostly built in the 1830s in Hulme and Moss Side, which coincided with, I think, the famine in Ireland, so that there was a huge immigration into Manchester for work coming from Ireland because there was starvation there. And the building was absolutely rock bottom quality.
Right.
I did a study for my planning thesis on the obsolescence of housing in Manchester. And in Hulme, the party walls were 1/2 brick thick.
Half brick?
Yes. In other words, 4.5 inches. just brick laid face to face. You know, there was no 9-inch wall, and the information came from the medical authorities. They were absolutely rife with bugs and cockroaches, which actually survived the demolition and rebuilding.
Yes, they did, didn't they? Well, that gives a touch of realism to this, that they had. I didn't know that about the relating to the Irish famine. It does make sense, doesn't it? But and maybe it was the phase development was a more realistic one of trying to get to rehouse people in situ in the place that they are, to keep some sense of the old community.
Well, I think the problem was, Bernard, density.
Yes, it was.
The density was absolutely huge.
Well,
so this terrible term overspill came up because they weren't building at the densities that existed in Moss Side and other areas. So yeah, they had to provide housing elsewhere, at Gamesley and in the north.
Yeah, they're in that film, The City Speaks. There's a comparison between the rottenness of Hulme and the wonders of Wythenshawe, which looks like heaven on earth. Yeah. But I think, yes, there's no doubt about it from what you said, that the housing was in a terrible state and something badly needed to be done about it. But the way in which it was done, and the wholesale demolition and removing people away from it rather than there. Though you talk about density, I'm wondering what the density of the population in central Manchester is with all these high-rise ones going up. It must be pretty high. Anyway, sorry, yeah, Barry, you want to come in again?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. One that Frank said, I live in a house with a half brick party wall, except for where there's a chimney breast. And surprisingly, there's no problem with noise. I guess maybe we're both quiet neighbours. This is one of the houses the council wanted to pull down in 1972.
You stopped them doing?
Yes, and this house was built in 1874. I think one of the main reasons why houses got into a bad state was because they were mainly private landlords, and certainly in this area, the ones which we accepted needed to be demolished were all private landlord houses. They were in a terrible state, and the council would not do anything about the private landlords, even though they had power to do things. They had statutory powers. They wouldn't do anything. So one of our campaigns was to try to put pressure on the council and the private landlords to do something before the houses actually got demolished.
Is that St. Mary's Church there? Does anybody recognise it? You know, the one
I'm sure
it
is.
It looks like it, doesn't it? Maybe not, but it's as I said, the churches and the pubs survived, and there's actually quite a lot of vegetation growing here in this colour photo of it. Here's another one, which is of looking towards the red bricks as they became known. You can see them in the distance here, and there's a town hall you can see in the far distance there, and there's Exchange Station as it was at the time.
Central.
Sorry, Central Station. You're quite right. Right, Philip. Central Station, and this is the sort of devastation in front of it. But these stayed, and it's an interesting case study actually. What happened with red bricks, or Bentley House Estate as it was made. And in that, the red brick flats are still there. They've got a very strong community spirit there. They were purpose built in the late 40s. So there was quite a lot of slum clearance before the Second World War. And these were built in the late 40s in a marginally Art Deco style. All of them either had decent sized balcony or a garden, and there's an awful lot of communal green space. And I think it is very interesting. Later on, they've done all sorts. They had one of the first local internet connections of anywhere here as well. There was something that was part of their Red Bricks history. What I found in doing this, there are all sorts of histories that I could go off at a tangent about, but I better not. I mean, there are two others I'll just mention. One of the prefabs, which we talked about before people arrived a bit, which were generally the people who lived in them loved them. And the other was the 1946 squatters uprising, which was astonishing, really. And that was caused partly by the fact that there hadn't been any housing built during the war for understandable reason. And in fact, there was some anti-building going on, that is the Blitz. So there were a lot of houses lost. And there was a huge backlog of housing needing to be built, huge amount, which is where the slum clearance comes in, of course. And on top of that, there were 106, something I should have been aware of, and I wasn't. There were 160,000 Polish servicemen who didn't want to go back to what was then communist Poland. And they stayed here and they needed housing too. So what happened with that? So I'm beginning to talk about it, aren't I? But very quickly, and there were 45,000 people in 1946 who'd either invaded posh properties or going empty properties in the big cities, and including to Andy Simpson, there was one in Alexandra Park. There was some squatters in Alexandra Park and some small buildings that were there then, temporary buildings. And but it didn't last very long. But the majority of them were in old military camps, and a lot of them were started off by ex-servicemen. So there are all sorts of related histories going on here. Here's another one. Were anybody aware of the Burley tree?
Yes.
It's the oldest tree in the area by far. And I remember it because I stopped by and took some photographs because there were people who were actually squatting in it to stop it being sawn down. And it's just opposite, on the corner where the lights are, where Asda is, diagonally opposite that. And it was in Burley Fields, and they said it was needed because they were going to construct a hotel there. Well, so eventually it was cut down in 1998 because, as I said, it was they were going to do a hotel. They said it was rotted. They got arborally, forgotten what they call people who specialize in trees, who were able to say that it was actually quite healthy. It was quite a rare tree, a black poplar, but they cut it down in 1998, even after they'd been twice refused. And that to me is just one little slice of what went on in later periods there, the Burley tree. Here's another piece of extraordinary history here. I can't quite believe this actually happened, because have any of you been in the Salutation pub? It's a lovely pub. Yep, Frank has. Because if you were at the Polly as was, you'd often retreat to the Salutation after a hard day's work at the chalk face. And so it was extremely popular. They used to have Morris dancers out there every summer, I remember, including one of the lecturers who was a very strong. But anyway, there is a blue plaque on the side of this, and I never knew about this. I don't know why nobody told me in one of the times I was there. It says, quote, Charlotte Bronte. In 1846, the Reverend Patrick Bronte came to Manchester for a cataract operation, accompanied by his daughter Charlotte. They took lodgings at 59 Boundary Street West. It was here that Charlotte began to write her first successful novel, Jane Eyre. Well, how many of you knew that? I think there is a lot of doubt that it wasn't that building, because it was built after, I think it was built after that. So it's very unlikely to have been that. but it's there's a bit of history that I was shocked to hear about, and I still don't quite believe. I don't know whether anybody else has got any evidence on that one, but that's let's claim it for Manchester anyway. The world wouldn't have had Jane Eyre without the Salutation pub. So that's going on about the first set of clearances. And now on to the second lot, the famous Crescents. There's no place like Hulme. They were built in 1972 after the old ones had been damned by the city corporation, as it was known. Endless rows of grimy houses, no gardens, no parks, no community, torn down in 1993. Well, maybe they're right with the first few bits on that, but there was certainly community there. And they were hoping by skillful landscaping and extensive tree planting, they're going to achieve a Hulme solution to the problem of 20th century living. Hail, Adam Crescent, Charles Barry Crescent, William Kent Crescent, and John Nash Crescent. Here, this is from the Evening News. Here was a touch of 18th century grace and dignity to municipal housing. Well, didn't seem to quite work out like that. But we have got to think, why did it end up this way? Because is anybody familiar with Park Hill, Sheffield? Yeah, Frank, you know about that one. It was designed by a J.L. Walmersley. And again, they made the analogy between Georgian London and Bath by the use of large-scale building in open spaces, landscape, and so on. But they have not been pulled down. And partly, well, Frank, have you got any explanation as to why that was the case?
Why Park Hill hasn't been pulled down?
Yeah, when it was a...
Well, it's listed now.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, but I think that generally because I was very aware of the problems that arose with the Hulme Crescents, in the sense that, okay, you've got an architectural design with the decks, and they were quite wide decks, and in fact they had the capacity to take a milk float along them, delivering.
If the flats were working, if the lifts were working, of course.
Yes. And they obviously had to use the lifts then, but there are all manner of social infrastructure aspects that needed to be considered by the council and changes made in that social infrastructure. Like, how do you do a funeral on a deck access?
I was talking to somebody earlier about that who was part of the what are those Pepperdine Pepperdine,
the director,
the funeral directors. And he said that he went on a couple of jobs to Hulme where the lifts weren't working and they had to carry the body down the stairs, which can't have been easy. So you're quite right, funerals and things like that. But the point I'd like to make about these is that they were done to a higher specification. By the time they got round to Hulme, budgets had been cut and corners were cut to actually produce them. I think that's one of the reasons. The other reason, I think, is where it's actually sited, because behind it are the hills. So it's in quite an interesting place for that.
Yes, in Sheffield.
In Sheffield, yeah.
Run out into the slope.
Yeah.
So that you could actually walk off at ground level.
Yeah. Whereas in Manchester, do you remember Ronan Point, the high-rise flats in London where there was a gas explosion with a concrete panel system built, which meant that you couldn't replace gas central heating. They had to have electrical heating with tenants, which led to rampant condensation. And there was damp and poor sewage system attracting vermin and social deprivation accompanied. So Sheffield came before all that and were done to a higher specification, and that's partly why they've also been renovated. Oh, that's the streets in the air that they were,
Yes.
See them, the biggest development in Europe at the time. And this is what they look like partly now. They were renovated by Urban Splash, which is a Manchester-based company. And as you say, they are now protected building. And as part of it, they're getting a £21 million arts hub, which is opening this year, which will be transformed into an art space. So you could see there was nothing intrinsically wrong with the notion of the design of these things. It was the way that it was done more than anything else. So I just thought that was an interesting comparison, really. This again was the Princess Road extension in 1971, as they were doing that. And I can remember, I don't know whether other people remember, the campaign in Princess Road in Moss Side to defend it and to stop the pulling down of the school just nearby there, which Vanessa Redgrave came to address, which I remember going to see her there in her Cockney accent. And as member, I think she was, is it the Revolutionary Workers' Party she was part of at the time? Or one of them anyway. But it didn't succeed in the Princess Road extension, which blew a hole through Princess Road, as many others did. And this was the Princess Road Bridge, as it was in 1972. And the archway, which I haven't got a photo of here, which was built later, which cost £4 million to install. So it does look very nice, I must say. Here's a lollipop person in 1973, and you can see the general state of destruction that was going on. And these are, I hope it is a picture of the Hulme Crescents. So I'm looking for I presume everybody knows why they were named the way they were. The one, John Nash, obviously from Bath. I'm not sure where William Kent and Charles Barry, were they all different Regency designers or something like that? Probably. But they were the Crescents, which became increasingly uninhabitable for people. Oops, sorry, don't know what happened there. It's not moving on for some reason. Let's escape that. Short technical hitch here. And start again. I'll just have to go through quickly through these. Nearly there. Yep, they're back to Park Hill. I hope it doesn't. Charles Barry Crescent, not looking particularly brilliant at that point. Where are the trees gone? Hardly any there. It became a nightmare place for families to live in because the lifts were frequently not available. People would stop delivering, milk deliveries would stop, postal deliveries would stop because of the liable to get mugged, and it was generally seen as a disaster. There's John Nash Crescent towards the end of its days. So at this time, there was a change. The city council decided not to demolish them straight away, but to move all the families out and allow students and others to come and live in them. And a lot of them, as one student said, the flats were actually quite comfortable. Individual flats were done to quite a high specification. There was quite a lot of room in them, though obviously there might be cockroaches and things in between the walls, I think was one of the problems. But the thing is as well that it turned out to be perfect for young people. Manchester's young this is from in Hatherley. Manchester's young bohemians who relished the estate's air of decaying modernism. By the early 1980s, it had an art house cinema, club nights run by the soon-to-be famous Factory Records. Here's kids in 1962 in Moss Side and in 1990 Moss Side. And this is what it was looking like when the students began to take over. Keep warm this winter caused trouble, became very political. And there were also various campaigns going on. Oh, this was demolition in 1993. There's the Junction Hotel, the Junction Pub, which is still there, but looking a bit in worse the wear. I'm not sure how long it's going to last. I think it really divided at an angle those two roads, which it did brilliantly. So I think it's a lovely building. It'd be really pity if we lost that. I think it is owned by somebody who says they're going to do something with it. Here again, we get the horses. Horses came there as well, amongst other things. It's you know, they had the Hulme look of intense youths in baggy second-hand suits. Many of the spaces were unused, led to a sense of possibility absent from the sewn-up high-rent city of today. There are also campaigns went on. Does anybody remember the Viraj Mendes campaign? It was a Sri Lankan who was threatened with deportation, and he went into sanctuary in a very small church there that was in Hulme. I think he's still there as well. He stayed there for several years and then he eventually was deported and now lives in Sri Lanka or somewhere else. I don't know what happened to him. But you can see there's also beginning to be lots and lots of graffiti. And again, the famous Arban Cinema. I didn't know it's called a Cinetique. There you go. Which used to show brilliant sets of films there. I don't know if you, again, people remember going to it, the Arban Cinema. I always thought they call themselves that so they could be the top of any listings. But is that the reason? Does anybody else? What? It sounds slightly German, doesn't it, somehow, the Arban? Anyway, that's what it was. And here's a fairly iconic one of two children running round the beneath the crescent. This, I think, shows a lot of what it was like. There were travelers staying there. There were young people staying there. There was an awful lot going on, which if you weren't into very loud late night music, it wasn't really your place. Here you can see, I think it's become more than just graffiti. It's become a form of wall art in the, as you can see, in the, here's another one. Here's Desert Storm DJ. And the following one, and here you can see the sound system that they've got, which was pretty effective on booming round the crescents, which is where they had these do's. And here you had the Punks picnic on Settle Walk in 1996. Punks were becoming part of the background to it. And again, there are some fairly famous people now who are involved in this. There was Lem Cisse, this was him in Hulme in 1991. And of course, Steve Coogan of Alan Partridge fame. He was a student in Manchester at the time and came to live in, I don't know whether that was his car, in which case he could afford not to live there, I think. And maybe it was just somebody else's. Here's some of the other graffiti, which in the image of Hulme, you can see it says Hulme in gold lettering, which I think is really a rather good one. And there also used to be things like theatre production. This is a group called Dogs of Heaven, who also helped arrange the fireworks displays that they had in 1993. And this was their version of Macbeth, I think. And I think there's supposed to be a head in the bag. And it was performed. They were originally going to do it at nighttime, but they couldn't get the lighting, so they had to stage it midday sometime. And they performed various dramas around the place. And here are pictures of some of the pyrotechnics that they got up to, which you can see were very well attended. And they weren't just fireworks, they were they were also trying to use the more European idea of lighting up buildings and things at the same time. So that's the way it was. Now, again, it's all very well to look back at these student times, you know, people who've come here as students, and it's probably for some of them the most formative time of their lives. And I think there were a lot of positives, but it did have to go eventually, or it did go. And where is Hulme now? Well, this is
a word, Bernard.
Yes, certainly, Frank, go on.
Some of my students, when I was working at the MMU School of Architecture, they were Malaysian and probably used to the situation of insects and mosquitoes and whatnot. But they'd say when they got up, the whole floor was covered with cockroaches in the crescents. They were living in the crescents, and were really sickened by that. In other words, the cockroaches from the 1830s houses had never been killed off. They were just actually still living in the cellars that were filled with rubble.
Yeah, true. Yeah,
that's the contribution.
Yeah, no, that's good. And at least the cockroaches have got their continuity of place, haven't they? Right, but this is looking at where has Hulme gone on from then. And this is from a blurb, a sales promo for a £23 million investment called Hulme Living. Where is Hulme now? Don't worry, it's exactly where it's all been. Now it's just in a much better place. Gone are the really ugly concrete blocks from years ago. If you drive through now, you'll see a dramatic change. And let's be honest, it's one that's definitely for the better. So that's the view of the new Hulme. And you certainly can say it's been a successful part gentrification of the area. Is that a reasonable thing to say? I think there are communities there, and it'd be wrong to say that there weren't, but it still seems a lot of it is very much in the shadow of the university and as a place for student housing and the like as well, which I'm not sure. The part of the new Hulme, which is a continuation of the old Hulme, is this, which is the Homes for Change Housing Cooperative. This is a co-op started off by one of the main activists at the time as the old one was being brought down. They managed to set up this co-op, which is still going very, very strong. It's got business units as well as workspaces, and it's just opposite where the Hulme Garden Centre is, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, and that's another look at the way inside it. And it really is a nice looking place. It was done on a similar basis, and it's retained, as he says, the vibrant creativity of the Crescents. It's fairly short, this. I'm only doing a short one on Moss Side because it is interesting that Barry said that the lower half, the southern part of Moss Side, wasn't torn down in this kind of glory period of slum clearance, and as now I think quite a thriving part, and has been done up reasonably well, though they could do with more greenery, I think, there.
Bernard, after we saved our area in Longside, we went round all the other areas helping groups of residents campaign against clearance of their area. Some of the one in Ladybarn, I remember, one in Levenshulme. The one in Levenshulme we didn't succeed with. But as a result of us going and helping all these other small pocket areas of slum clearance, the council eventually gave up their slum clearance programme because they kept losing public inquiries.
Yeah, it is interesting. I think the point you make, which is contestable but an interesting one, is the two areas which subsequently suffered from serious gang warfare were the rebuilt estates in Moss Side and Longside Ardwick. Interesting point of view, that, isn't it? I'm not saying it's obviously just determined by that, but that's interesting that it's where it happened. Anyway, let's just go a bit down Nostalgia Road, which is I was brought up in Whalley Range, so I was very familiar with Alexandra Road, and I think everybody who remembers it remembers a really vibrant and excellent shopping area. So here are some photos just to remind you of its variety. So there you've got Frost's, which looks like a newsagent and tobacconist. So it's got some art materials there, and a watch repairs company, a book exchange. As you can see, they're quite substantial houses above it as well. Here's a good one, and the one to the right of it is UCP, United Cow Products. Tripe and Cow Heels, but also a cafe, and there a big pram shop and a furniture shop. Anybody ever go to the UCP? I was thinking I'd have to eat cow heels there, so I didn't go. I don't know what. It's not a very attractive title to it, but apparently the cafes are quite good. Anyway, that's one of them. This is when it was being pulled down. I think is that the Princess Road or the Alexandra Road? I think it's the Alexandra Road, actually. And their idea, of course, was to transform all of this and to build a new one, which became the Moss Side Centre, which in itself was a failure and was eventually itself more or less pulled down. And you now have Hulme High Street, which I go to every day because that's where the leisure centre is and I can go swimming there. Here you've got the chemists. Is that a butcher's, Middlehurst? Peter Pell, gents outfitters, and Waterworths. I don't know what they were selling. And that's the corner of Raby Street. This, I think, is the corner of Alexandra Road and Moss Lane West. Melrose. It looks like it was on at least on two stories. That a sale going on at that time. I bet there were some bargains there to be held, or contemporary money anyway. Freeman, Hardy and Willis, the shoe shop. Garner's. I think there used to be. Was there one of these places where you could get sarsaparilla and stuff like that? What do they call them? Like Fitzpatrick's were. And this is a very familiar one. This was Redmond's, where we'd always get our meat from there every week. Does anyone else remember that?
Yes.
Look how popular it was. I love looking at the people's outfits and the prams and the cars and these things as well. It wasn't all brilliant. Near Upper Brook Street was slightly further away. There were these in 1964 showing there was in a poor state. Back at there's a cafe, the studio, the Supersonic Cleaners, where you could get a super mend. The corner of Graham Street, the panorama looking to Great Western Street from Talbot Street corner. And again, you can see, by and large, they've just been taken down. Here is some of the process of it. A later one from 1990. It's a very dramatic one, that, with that poster on the corner, isn't it? I never knew they were that in your face, was that. Very interesting. There they are. Still, yeah, they got the plastic cover for the trolley, of course, which you'd need, as we did have. Anybody like them make any final comments?
To say that my mother used to say that for ordinary shopping, they went to Stretford Road. If they went posh shopping, it was Alexandra Road.
Oh, wow. I never saw it as posh, but maybe because I don't know, maybe I was posh.
More posh than Stretford Road.
Yes, I can see that. Anybody else got any comments?
When I read the blurb for the talk, it indicated that you might also have something to say about current policies. And obviously you've kind of run out of time a bit, but I wonder if you did have anything that you were, if you were going to draw any parallels between, clearance of the 1960s and the kind of development that was going on and what's happening more now in the city centre, because the scale of development is just incredible, I think, in Manchester. I'm just wondering if you've got any observations on that.
Well, I've done a series of talks on this for the elders, which I didn't prepare as much in advance, but I did one on Salford as well. And there's a remarkable story to be told there about the Salford's play streets which were a fantastic innovation at the time. It had more play streets than anywhere in the country. In fact, he got the model from New York and put them there. But anyway, that's another thing. In terms of current policies, I think they've certainly given up the idea that you just wholesale wipe out an area, which is good. But what I'm very concerned about is the way in which the council is selling off land and allowing it to be developed in such a way that meets their particular model of urban development, which is huge, big, high-rise flats owned by Far Eastern consortiums. But there is also, I talked with somebody who's an activist in North Manchester. Some of this, if you like, clearances are going on up there. And they say what they seem to be doing, this was their view, was that they were blaming the people who were living there for the mess that certain areas were in, clearing them out and getting and trying to go for a little bit of gentrification, as if that solves everything. So I just feel I need to know more about it, and it really is marked there as an area to work on. It's got to be thought through, because again, it's not necessarily that they've been evil in their intentions, but I think the consequences of it aren't all positive. Anne, yep.
Yes, my memories of Alexandra Road when I worked as a Saturday girl in Woolworths.
Oh, yeah.
We were given our overalls to wear in pieces. We had to sit and sew them up. As a Saturday girl, you got the old ones. And if you dropped the money on the floor, it went through a crack.
Oh, that in the floorboard. Yeah.
Into the cellar. And also I remember the egg shop further up.
That's something I've looked for a photo of that, because people thought I was inventing it. There was a shop that just sold eggs, wasn't there?
And it moved into the Moss Side Market, but then it went.
But I think we'll have to leave it there. And thank you for staying with it to this.
No, thank you, Bernard. We can see
Thank
that
you,
you've got
Bernard.
a lot
Thank
of
you
work
very much,
into
Bernard.
it, so we thank you very much.